Hello and welcome to the Album Man. Today we're going to be talking about the Bob Dylan Super Bowl controversy. Now I know it's a little while ago that the Super Bowl is, but I still think this topic is very relevant and a very interesting one. So if you don't know, Bob Dylan on the Super Bowl is famous for its ad breaks and the amount of money that these companies pay for the adverts at halftime of the Super Bowl is just, amazing because, well, there's so many people watching it. It's a huge place to get your products out there. So Chrysler, the car company, has an advert which featured Bob Dylan saying the jingoistic lines such as, "Is there anything more America than America?" and "So let Germany brew your beer, let Switzerland make your watch, let Asia assemble your phone, we will build your car." Now, except for the bit of irony that, of course, Chrysler is owned by Fiat, and Fiat are an Italian company, and it's just a subsidiary, so, is there anything more American than America? Italy. So that's a little well, but still, on social media particularly, this caused a lot of outcry. Lots of Dylan fans just, going against and calling him a corporate shill, a sellout. So I wanted to see if these criticisms being lobbed towards Dylan were fair, or whether Dylan was justified in doing this advert. And that is, I think it's quite an interesting topic. You see, we have to, of course, first go back to what Bob Dylan represents for people, and especially did represent in the 60s when he was at the height of his fame. He represented a changing in attitudes and social attitudes from things like the civil rights movement. I mean, I believe he even played at the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech throughout that day. I mean, just, what a place to play sign. I mean, one of the most important events, really, certainly in the 20th century. I mean, just honestly, wow. And, it's a great example of what he did represent. He represents, as I said, a changing in ideas. He put across, a lot of criticism against the big corporations, the big companies, against the, against the man. And especially with songs like "The Times They Are, They're Changing," when he says, "Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call, don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he who gets ahead will be he who is stalled. There's a battle outside and it is raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing." Released, of course, in 1964 on the album of the same name, "The Times They Are Changing." And then only a year later, in his fantastic, one of his opuses, "It's Alright Mama Only Bleeding," on the Bringing It All Back Home album, particularly against advertisements, and the advertisement that bombards people in the States and over here in the UK and Europe as well. Advertising is everywhere and has been for a long time. The corporations constantly trying to manipulate your mind into going for their products, the corporate greed. It's something that's very easy to hate, especially when you're young. I admit I lean towards some socialist ideas in my political views, and it's very easy to get carried away with these idealistic ideas and, the whole idea of communism and everyone living happily together and no selfishness or greed and everyone working for a common cause. It's something that sounds nice, and I think Bob Dylan invoked a lot of those feelings in his lyrics. And as I said, particularly in "It's Alright Mama Only Bleeding," he says, advertising signs, they con you into thinking you're the one that can do what's never been done, that can win what's never been won. Meantime, life outside goes on all around you. And what a fantastic condemnation of just the mass advertising that you get. And now, here he is, Mr. Bob Dylan, Mr. Rebel, the voice of a generation, quote unquote, because that's certainly not a tag he was ever a fan of, and certainly not a mantle he ever chose to assume. It was one that was thrust upon him because of his words. And now he's telling you that, is there anything more America than America? And it's interesting, honestly. From Twitter, there were people saying, "I'm sorry, young Bob Dylan would vomit in the mouth of old Bob Dylan for making car commercials, especially jingoistic ones." And in one sense, I can understand that sentiment, because young Bob Dylan definitely seemed to have more radical, idealistic political views. Similar to, you look at, John Lennon and, the Imagine song, it really surmises a lot of his political views, and, that idealism was something that was, rampant in music in the 60s and 70s, and a very interesting topic, and still one that, of course, people cover today, but more in their youth. And it seems as Bob Dylan's grown older, he's moved away from the idealism. He's realised that the world can't be how he would want it to be. I think, honestly, one of the best things that surmises, actually, Bob Dylan at the moment. See, the poet T.S. Eliot, who was, of course, a huge inspiration, on Dylan. I mean, Dylan hugely inspired by T.S. Eliot, referencing him directly in Desolation Row, and some of Dylan's lyrics definitely have some parallels to The Wasteland as well, and you can definitely see that influence. But T.S. Eliot himself was influenced, particularly in his earlier days, by Alfred Lord Tennyson, another poet. And he said about Tennyson that Tennyson was the most instinctive rebel against a society in which he was the most perfect conformist. And to me, that quote is just perfect for this. Dylan is the most instinctive rebel against a society in which he was the most perfect conformist. As he has grown older in age, as he's in his 60s, I think 60s now, maybe 70s, probably 70s actually, I'm honestly not too sure on Dylan's age. But his viewpoints have mellowed out. He's realised the futility in his earlier idealism. He's realised the way the world works, and that this is the only way that the world can work. Well, certainly in my opinion it is. I don't believe humans are capable of any other system other than capitalism for a long period of time, without getting into too much political theory. And, someone I found quite interesting, Brian Steinberg from Variety magazine put that one of the reasons that he did this was just to try and remain relevant in today's music industry, and, quote, put bluntly, with radio formats so narrow, music videos are out of vogue, musicians often have a tough time getting their work heard. For Dylan, an artist whose time in the spotlight was most intense in the 1960s, the feat is more difficult, even if he does continue to release albums that gain plaudits and critical acclaim. And that's true. Tempest was lauded with critical acclaim, but does that mean it really appeals necessarily to my generation? Can it, I think people of my age group don't relate to Dylan as much so. They don't find him the voice of their generation. They see him as the voice of a generation gone by, a generation that, is completely different, which really, in a way, they parallel themselves so much, and attitudes and feelings and thoughts are really still fundamentally the same. It's just presented in a slightly different way. And yeah, I think this was an attempt by Dylan to become more relevant in a way, and also I think, yes, any man can be bought. I don't think anyone is above being bought, not even Bob Dylan, not even after all he stands for. And yes, while his lyrics certainly did convey that corporate structure and anti-establishment, that's what I'm trying to look for, anti-establishment sentimentality, it doesn't mean that he ever chose to accept the mantle of being the figure of anti-establishment thought. My words kind of a bit bad now. He didn't ever accept that mantle. He didn't ever choose to become the figurehead. He didn't want to become the leader. He didn't want to become a role model for people. He just wanted to sing his songs. He just wanted to sing about the times, what he observed, what he saw all around him, and his thoughts and feelings. I think one of the things with Dylan is that I think his fame spiraled out of control more so than he could ever have believed. And I think people accusing him of being a corporate show, and young Bob Dylan would vomit in the mouth of old Dylan. Now, would young Dylan agree with this Chrysler advert? No, I think he would be pretty appalled. He would say, why, old Dylan, why are you doing this? Why are you selling out? Why are you conforming to the establishment? Why are you conforming to it? And I think old Dylan, with more sense, more life experience, would realise that, that's just the way the world works, and that the, idealism is futile. It doesn't do anything except, it doesn't really change anything. The times, they aren't changing, unfortunately, and I can't see them changing anytime soon. So that's some of my opinions on Dylan. I don't think he did sell out per se. I just think he got offered a nice check and took it. And you could say, well, doesn't that sound like selling out? That it is, but I think selling out is when you go against all your ideals. And I agree, if young Dylan had done this, I could understand a lot more. But I think old Dylan's ideals and current Dylan's ideals are a lot different to what they were back then. I mean, you know, it's 50 years since the Times They Are Changing was released. Exactly 50 years. People change, and Dylan certainly has. This has been The Album Man. Thanks for watching. Comment, rate, subscribe, and as usual, long live rock and roll.